So, hello everyone. We should be live, I believe. I'm not seeing it on my chat, but I'm going to assume that we are. And I'll actually look in the live chat for kind of a confirmation that we're going in live right now. So it's not quite as bad as it sounds in terms of last minute. I mean, really, for round one, people do have a little bit more time than you might think. But we're going to talk today about application tips for round one and some things to help you think about, are you ready for round one? All right, so just pardon me for a second while I'm wanting to make sure. Yep, I'm seeing it. Okay, good. So let's go ahead. You probably know me. Many of you have been on GMAT Club before, and I've been on several chats with you. So my name's Donna Bauman. I've been with Stratus Admissions for the last 8 years. Prior to that, I worked on the admissions side at UNC Kenan-Flagler. And, storytelling and the admissions story is something that I've spent really the best part of my career doing. And so it's something I care deeply about, and I really enjoy working with people to help them identify the stories that matter to them, to be memorable, and so that you come across in the admissions process is not just sort of a flat, career choice, but as a fully developed, an interesting person, and make a connection to admissions. So that's what I do. Enjoy working with people. It's really rewarding, especially when you see people, just have their dreams come true. A little bit about Stratus. And again, I'll be very brief on this because I think a lot of you know Stratus, but the biggest thing is that we really are team oriented. So when you work with us, it's impossible to know everything about all the top MBA programs. So when you work with us, not only do you have a trusted counselor, but for every school that you're looking at, we will bring in someone who knows that school really well. So you get kind of the best of a trusted advisor, plus you have school-specific advice, and also a strategist, so another person to sort of look at your story, because admissions decisions are never made by one person. So it's really helpful to have a lot of people on your team. So that's a little bit about Stratus. And then we're going to talk, here's our agenda. We're going to talk about, and actually for some reason this is slow. Okay, this is slow from what I'm seeing. The areas of evaluation the schools are, and then we're going to talk about your assessment of readiness. And I'm going to particularly talk about essays and short answers. So that is something I'm going to spend the most time on, because that's kind of the last minute thing. But I still think it's useful for us to go through a little bit of academics, professional experience, recommendations, and community engagement, and for you to think about where you are in your journey and how you can sort of make sure you're up to speed on that. So in terms of academics, there's nothing that you can do in short of, getting a great GMAT or GRE score next week that you've been working on. But, essentially your GPA is fixed at this point, and your GMAT score is it is what it is. If you feel like it's not where it needs to be, that might be a reason to evaluate with a trusted advisor, should you go in round one or round two. But know that, and other than, there may be some things about your academics, like if you have quantitative skills and it's not showing up in your test scores, make sure you call out where you did well quantitatively on your transcript. Schools look at transcripts, so they are going to see that, but that's one place where, you want to just make sure that wherever you can, that they know you can do the work. So if they can't see it from the test score or your grades, maybe they can see it from an additional course you took. Maybe they can see it from your recommenders sharing your quantitative prowess, but things like that you need to think about. In terms of professional experience, there is something that you can do in terms of professional experience. Just think about, do you have at this point, the 3 to 7 years that would be ideal? Has your progression been solid in terms of the work that you've done? You've had good progression. How can you demonstrate that you are you've had contributions that are impactful to the organization? Have you developed, why you've changed jobs? All of these things, so that there's not anything that when an admissions person is reading your application, they understand your story. Recommendations, this can sometimes be a reason why you might want to go to round 2, even if you are ready in every other place for round 1. This is something that we've talked about. We've heard Harvard say in some of our conversations with them that if they had to choose, and this may be shocking to you, but if they had to choose between your recommendations and your essays, they would actually rather see your recommendations. So that's just an indication of just how important recommendations can be in this process. So if you have a relationship with your boss where for some reason there's a project that's not quite done, or there's you are working sort of in concert with them where they're helping you decide whether to go back to school or not, and perhaps they're even sponsoring you, you want to make sure that you have a strong recommendation that supports that. So if it will somehow take you longer to get that, where your employer is expecting it to be a little bit later in the process and they're just not ready to write you their recommendation, that could be a good reason to to go to round 2. Otherwise, if you are on track for round 1, you definitely need to make sure that your recommendations are in process. And that means putting your recommenders' names into the portal so that they're getting sent that information. You want to make sure that your recommender is doing the heavy lifting on this. You do your heavy lifting when you decide who's your recommender. But and you can have a conversation with them. You can make sure that they understand your goals and what is important to you and why you need an MBA, but let them do the recommendation. Time and time again, and I know this is a challenge because sometimes recommenders push back, but you want to find the person who's going to write you a strong recommendation. A recommender is going to write a better recommendation than you could write for yourself. You're not supposed to write your own recommendations. And it's really something that if the schools knew, you'd be immediately disqualified. So really work on making sure that your recommender understands how important that is. If needed, find a different recommender. And you can say that as the reason why perhaps you don't have a supervisor, if that's really the situation you're in. And I think the schools would respect your integrity for the fact that you're really working to do that. So, but nevertheless, if your recommendations process is not well underway with just, less than a month to go, it's going to be tight if you're asking someone to, spend the time to do this. So definitely prioritize recommendations if you haven't, and you're still gunning for round 1. All right, the next one is leadership and community engagement. And really this one, there's not, again, a whole lot you can do. You don't want to join 10 new clubs in the next month. That's not going to do anything. But it may be that when you think about what you have done and organizations that you've been a part of, there may be ways to highlight activity that you've done. Make sure that that's on your resume, or make sure that you're talking about things that you've done recently. Maybe it's been an organization that you've been a part of for a long time, but you have some recent activity that you want to talk about. So make sure that that is in your short answers or in your resume or somewhere for schools to see it. The next one, essays and short stories. That's one where I'm going to really go deep, because this is, I think, the thing that is probably on your mind the most if you are really at the last minute, kind of thinking about how do I be prepared for essays and short answers. So I'm going to go through kind of a checklist, things to think about. So first one, and this is simple, but surprising how important, and importantly, sometimes people miss this. Did you answer the question? So really look at the question. And so, for example, Kellogg's got a new leadership question. And it's, Kellogg leaders are primed to tackle today's pressing concerns everywhere, from the boardroom to neighborhoods. Tell us about a time in your life when you needed a combination of skills to solve a problem or overcome a challenge. Which skills did you use? What did you accomplish? So notice a time. So that means you don't want to tell them about 6 times. You're not going to be able to answer their question if you use 5 different examples. So really focus on one particular time. Notice that they talk about a combination of skills. So if you don't address what those skills were, you aren't answering this question. So if you applied last year and you have this sort of leadership idea in mind, you've got to tweak your thinking a little when you approach it this year. What did you accomplish? And when you talk about, so that's, what was the result, what happened, but going back to what skills did you use, you really want to be, specific about what you did and how, for example, your collaboration skills help perhaps bring 2 groups of people together that needed to be together. So just really, it's important when you're writing, when you're looking at your school's essays, have the question at the top of the outline. And even if the school doesn't want you to submit the question with it, have it for your own guidance so that at different checkpoints along the way, you're kind of going back. Did I answer all parts of this question? Because that's something that really I see often as a very common mistake that people make. All right. Another one's, did you review the entire application? And that means going into the application itself and looking at those short answer questions. For example, Harvard asked the question, what more do we need to know? Well, how can you answer the question if you don't know what you've told them already? You've got to let them know. You've got to really read through that. And sometimes there are hidden questions. So for example, Yale's essay question, they talk about having just one essay question. What's the biggest commitment? And actually this year you can choose among a couple choices. But in the short answer section, there are questions about, how does Yale help you achieve your goals? So if you wait until the last minute to look at that, you're not going to give it the time it deserves. In the case of a Stanford or a Harvard application where there's so many short answer questions, you don't need to spend your time on a Harvard essay explaining in depth your career goals when they've given you a short answer question to do it. It doesn't mean you can't touch upon it briefly, but you want it to be additive and not repetitive. So you really do need to look at things in concert and look at the entire application so you see what's happening. A lot of schools now are adding a new question in sort of short answer in the personal section about, tell us about your background and how it's influenced you. And often you can get some really insightful, pieces of information across to a school by answering that question. If you wait until the last minute, you're going to miss it and you won't be able to answer it well. And it won't kind of flow in the same way that your application, it just won't flow as well. So you'll be talking about maybe the same thing, or they won't be synergistically, okay, in my essays, I'm talking about this, and short answers, I'm talking about this. So the only way that that's going to happen really is if you do that together. So, all right. Then, are your career goals attainable given your background, yet aspirational enough that they require an MBA? So for example, if you did Teach for America, and again, actually business schools love Teach for America people, so lots of options for you. But let's say you were an English major and now you're saying right out of the gates, you want to do private equity. That's going to be a pretty big stretch. So you're going to be better off perhaps thinking about, maybe I want to get into, working for a startup company and perhaps leveraging, maybe there's something with AI and there's something about your English background that could be really helpful. Something where you have some skills already that could be helpful. So definitely think about, do the goals make sense? You don't want to be thrown out with a completely unrealistic goal. Now, I do think sometimes people stress too much about what their goals are. Schools, it's not like there's a right answer and a wrong answer. Schools really want to know what you're thinking. But you do need to be at least in the ballpark that there is, a decent chance that the school's going to be able to be successful and help you. And perhaps if it's a two-step process, just showing that that it's a two-step process. Also aspirational in that, if you just want to, get an MBA to get like one level higher in your company, that may be not as ambitious enough. Business schools are also evaluating your aspirations, your ambition. So you do want to make sure that your goals, show some level of aspiration and ambition that is commensurate with the kind of experiences that school can provide you. Next one, I try to, first of all, it's do some assessment. What skills do you need to reach your post-MBA goals? Do you understand how this school can help you? So that's where you've got to do that thinking now. And, if you haven't done a good job rushing through your essays when you haven't addressed this, or you're not really clear about what you need, you're not going to do a good job. So really make sure that you've done that. This next one, I like this. Think like a kindergarten teacher when approaching your essays. It is amazing to me how many essays I read from people where they just start, and this is when you don't do an outline. So my other tip is have an outline where you have a roadmap, where you're going. Let's say, you want to get into investment banking and you want to cover tech companies. So your key development areas might be some things around finance, some things around tech, and obviously developing your leadership skills. If you group your support points, especially in a goals essay, here are the things that this school does around finance that are interesting to me, and not just list them, but here's how it's going to help me and my unique experience. Same thing, here's how I'm going to grow in my tech knowledge. Here's how I'm going to grow in my leadership. When you're reading it, you can really understand the points. And a tip that I think could be helpful is highlight, put a green color on key development point A, put a blue on key development point B, and, peach on C. And then as you read your essay and you're highlighting, if you see that it looks more like this mishmash on the bottom where it's one color, then another color, you're jumping around, you're not going to be able to let people really see things as clearly. You're not going to be able to follow your train of thought. So that is really a simple thing that you can do as you're looking at your essays, is kind of, have I talked about things together so that when I'm speaking about something, I don't have to go back and, I'm referring to something 2 paragraphs earlier. If you're speaking about, how you're going to grow in a classroom and how you're going to develop your finance skills, put all the resources, put the clubs, put everything that was relevant to that thought process, and then move on. And it's going to be a whole lot easier for someone to follow through. And that's just kind of, again, kindergarten teacher, there's a section for coloring, and all the coloring things are in that section. There's a section for maybe playing kitchen, and all the kitchen things are in that area. So it's just easier to kind of know what group you're in when you set it up that way. All right. As another, is it, when you read your essays, ask yourself, is this something that only you can say, or is this something everybody can say? Everybody could say the case method about Harvard or Darden, for that matter. That's not really gonna move any meters or be real memorable. You can mention the case method, but it would be more in the context of perhaps you discussed with a student a particular case, and you realize that your background in, perhaps you have some kind of legal background, and you're able to bring a legal perspective to the classroom that's not going to be as common as other people who are more likely, have more of a business background. So think about how uniquely you might be able to bet. So it's not that you can't say anything about that, but you really need to think about, am I saying or mentioning things in a way that really brings to light something that only I can say? Same thing around, openings in terms of like, what are your goals? There's millions of things, but if you were looking at big buckets, some kind of finance, some kind of consulting, some kind of marketing, perhaps some kind of, uh, tech, so it's real estate. But what's interesting to the school is not so much that you just, that you're in the consultant bucket, but what is it about your background and experience that has led you to realize that the skills of a consultant, the sort of looking at the, big picture strategy, is important. That's what you want to share. I actually remember having a conversation with someone who understood that, even through like some of the hobbies that they had when they were playing in some sports, that they had the ability to kind of look at the field almost like a quarterback perspective, where they're seeing all the pieces, and tying that to, okay, so that's I've gravitated to consulting because I like to look at all of the pieces. That's going to make you more memorable, stand out more than just kind of blank and just sort of throwing yourself in some very large bucket. So think about that. You want your opening to be interesting enough so that the person wants to keep reading. Again, I've been that person in the past who had, and this is in the old days where there were literally stacks of files that I had to read. If you start reading the 30th one, the 40th one, they start to blend together. But when someone brings it to life and maybe makes connections between, again, how a consultant is similar to a quarterback, or how a banker, or how someone, the skills that you had as a chef help you pay attention to detail and make you, better as a banker. Those kinds of things where it's unexpected, those will stay with people more than just kind of, writing something generic that if you went back and read it, you realize that anybody who was applying could say the same thing. You want to ask yourself, did the admissions team learn something about you kind of beyond your resume? They have that. They've got your resume. They've got all kinds of short answer questions. They really want to get to know who you are. So I think that's important. Let's see. Don't cut and paste. This is something that each one of these MBA programs, there is no exactly similar question. Even ones where there's elements that are perhaps there's some similarities around goals questions, they still have to be, each school you need to look at on its own. And sometimes the phrasing and the words that you would use for one school, if you try to just copy and paste them to the other school, they're going to be a little off. So I would say don't do that. When you mention another school in your essay, and that has happened, I've read it, I've seen it happen to people, that can happen when you cut and paste, right? If you're cut and pasting from another school and you don't realize that you mentioned the school's name and you miss it, that is something that people just hate when that happens. They cringe. It really is. Nothing is, if a school really likes you and you're really strong, I think they perhaps might overlook it, but it's really something so simple and you don't want to do it. So as you're rushing to the end, make sure you don't cut corners and miss something really simple like that. No excuse. Do a search and find, do not make that mistake. Short answers are also an area where you can distinguish yourself. Sometimes people are tempted, to describe the role or describe the company. Make sure that it's not exactly the same as how you describe it on your resume, because they already have the resume. Make sure that you don't lift. So for example, it might be that you've got a question, describe the company, and then you go to the website and you see, oh, the company says we do X. And you are tempted to just copy and paste that into your application in the short answers. Anything in the application, and it could be, the short answers, I would say, are fair game. Schools have these plagiarization softwares and also a way to check, is this anything similar to the internet? So nothing that you put into your application should be similar. It should be come from any online source, because that's just stupid. You should synthesize and be able to explain in short answers what your company does. But you can set yourself apart, first of all, by showing that you can synthesize and come up with your own descriptions for what your company does, and make it additive to your resume so that you're not just giving them the same information. Again, being more aware in this chat GPT and AI environment, that you want to really make sure that it's your voice, your thoughts, that are coming through, so that the school can get to know you. And I did want to touch a little bit on, there's all kinds of discussions going on from the school side, going on from, I'm sure, candidate side. One of the things we talked about this summer, when I was part of a group of admissions consultants called AGAC, and we had a schools day where admissions directors from all the schools were talking, and we had some really interesting conversations about chat GPT. And I think schools are no one knows what quite to do with it. But one of the things where I am right now is that, if you search the internet and you say, well, tell me about Wharton. I mean, the internet knows about Wharton. Wharton knows about Wharton. And you regurgitating, somehow telling Wharton about itself, does absolutely nothing to let them know about you. So unless you're, some kind of celebrity and there's a whole lot of online material about you and your insights and your goals and hopes and dreams, I really think you are going to be ill-served by trying to take a shortcut and think that there's some magic, thing. I think this is something where you have to do your hard work, and kind of think about, what's important to you. What are the experiences that you've had that have shaped you and brought you to this moment in time where you want to get an MBA? So really, I would say lean into that and don't worry so much about all the, stuff that's out there, because that's not really going to tell the school. What they most want to know is about you. They already know about them, so they don't need you to tell them about them. All right, so I think that's all I have on this. I'm going to say a little bit about how Stratus can help, and this is, it depends. And this sort of shows you, if we have 10 minutes, you can do a lot more, and perhaps this is, on the admission side, like 10 days or something like that. If we just have, a day or less, perhaps at this point we can do, be a soundboard or answer some questions for you. We do offer hourly support, and that is something that, in terms of round one, that's really all we could do. And we have a team of people at Stratus that could, help you tighten up your goals, maybe be a sanity check on your narrative, look at your resume, brainstorm on some of your essay ideas, also prepare for interviews. So that's certainly something that we can do, and you can reach out to us on our website for that. If you're thinking through some of the things that I talked about on this talk, that, gee, I'm still waiting on my recommendation, or I don't think I'm going to get a good recommendation until I finish this project, so I better do round two, or I need to work on my testing, so I'm going to hold off on that. If you're looking at round two, then you do have time for us to kind of do some of the things that we do when we work with people comprehensively, really take you through an unhurried exploration of some of your, your career goals and what are important experiences to you, to have a strategy for your MBA, to strategize about how to, approach test prep, to think more and be guided with school selection, all of these things. So if that's the case, then the comprehensive could work. It's just a little bit about Stratus. I think these are the scan codes. If you want to schedule a free consultation, you can do that. We have free guides on all the schools, and that could be really helpful to you if you're sort of in the last minute stage. So definitely encourage you to look at that. I'm trying to look here and see what kind of questions. Let's see. We've got, how does school verify the claims we make on the resume about community work or any other detail? So that's a good question. And I would say, schools some schools use a process like a Revera, sort of a fact checking site after you've been accepted and before you're sort of all finalized. So it's kind of a starting process. And I would say that the community work's probably a little bit harder to verify and perhaps not as scrutinized. But, I think you want to make sure that if you are challenged, that you have some way to support whatever it is that you've said. So that might be, making sure that the director of that community organization, their leaders know about you, or if you feel like they're leaving or something, maybe they can write some kind of a statement for you so that you have that. But I think you want to just make sure that you have a way to verify it. I don't think they're going to be chasing down your, um, like sustainability club in college when you're now 6 years, out of college. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, but I would make sure that you feel like you have a way to verify as much as you can. I think that the employment piece is the part that really is getting much more scrutiny. So that I would encourage you to really make sure that your date's good. And another good tip on that, and this is so important, your LinkedIn profile and your short answer questions and your resume all should match. If they don't match, nothing annoys admissions people more than you said you started this job in February on LinkedIn, and maybe it's because you didn't update it or you forgot, and then you put it on your resume as January. Two things happen there. One, they think you're lazy, which is not a good look. Or two, they think you're lying or hiding something. Also not a good look. So you should do the diligence now to just make sure everything that's out there in any form that a school could see is all consistent and matches. So those dates, so that is definitely something that you should be doing in this sort of last minute push. Let's see. How to sift schools into round 1 or round 2. So I would say, for the most part, I would say the schools that you really want the most, the ones that you are most excited about, I would put those in round 1. I have some people that maybe just feel like they don't want to put it all, like, so they have Harvard in round 1 and Stanford in round 2 just because they want to feel like, if it doesn't work in round 1 with some of their top schools, that they've still got a chance in the second round. One reason that you might want to put, there's a lot of advantages to kind of putting everything in the same round, and that's, you are going to get your information all at the same time. So for example, if you apply to some schools in round 1, but then you have a school that you really like, or perhaps a school that you might have gotten a big scholarship that's in round 2, you are going to have to make decisions and deposits in round 1 without knowing what happened in round 2. So if you are trying to, again, perhaps have some competitive, scholarships at one school where you might be able to, and I use this term very loosely because I think this is a trend that is not going over well with admissions directors in schools. In no way this is like shopping for a car. So you're not like, just because a school gave you a scholarship, another school may not give you a scholarship, and you should not expect or demand that you will get it. But it may be that, again, if you have certain situations and you're explaining to the school, well, I have this option, then it could be something that they factor in and think about. But again, if you don't have that information in the same round, it's irrelevant. And, so that's a reason to think about, sifting schools in round 1 and round 2. Again, I would say that in general, the schools perhaps in round 2 are the ones that, if you need round 2 because you went for round one and you found that you weren't successful. And then you want to make sure you have a good strategy in place for what are those round two schools, and get started on that. Let's see. Is LinkedIn profile necessary for someone with a family business background? So I think a LinkedIn profile is helpful for everybody, because it's not, most schools do ask for the LinkedIn link as part of the short answer questions, things to fill in. I wouldn't say that everybody has that for every candidate it's automatic that the school looks to your LinkedIn, but if there are questions about something, or they want to get a sense of, if you're in a family business and perhaps it's not a well-known firm and it isn't as large, it could be comforting for the school to look at your LinkedIn and see that you had over 500 connections, and that maybe you had connections with a lot of people who are working at, larger companies, so that they see that you have kind of a professional network that would be expected of someone for an MBA program. Someone coming into an MBA program, works in a family business, and has had no sort of interaction with the broader business community, and is coming in with like 30 people in their LinkedIn profile, is going to be a big red flag for a school. So if you do have a sort of a maybe less traditional background, I think the LinkedIn profile and having it look really professional and up to speed and very corporate could help you. So that would be an example there. Let me see if there's any other questions that I have in here, because I think we have a little bit more time. Let's see. How to spell great information. I am looking at the chat right now, so if there's anybody else that has other chat questions, let me know. I'm going to run through and think about some other just general tips while I'm monitoring here. Let's see. I think, this is something, sometimes when people, you get in, and this is why it's really important to keep that question always at the front of what you're doing. Sometimes people have this whole process of applying for MBA, it's very therapeutic, and it gets people to look at things and think about things that maybe they've never thought about. And sometimes people get very attached to certain things, like certain experiences in their life that were very important to them. For example, perhaps an illness of a parent, or having to make a move, or something, and it may be that is important, but it may be, it's particularly when it has to do with other family members, like maybe your mom lost her job, or your parents got divorced. If you're not careful, you don't want to make sure that you're spending too much of your precious real estate talking about something that really isn't directly related to you and your career goals. So, going on a tangent about, how difficult it was during, a family crisis. Again, not to in any way minimize that was important, and that it's important and good to reflect about these things. But you got to remember, in these essays, you've got perhaps 20 to 30 minutes of time for an admissions person to be looking at your story and what you are telling them. And you want to make sure that you're very selective about what you share, because you can't share everything. So if there's a story that, again, feels really important to you, but it really isn't that connected to, what the question is, or advancing what it is that the school really wants to know about you, which is, are you going to be engaged in the class? Are you going to have the ability to handle the work? Are you going to give back and share, and be a net giver and not a net taker? If it's not sharing those kinds of things, don't get so attached to feel like you have to share that. And that's where sometimes having someone else read your essays, and give you that like feedback of, this is a tangent, this is extraneous, could help you. Because sometimes when you're too close to it, you feel good sharing the story, but it may not be the story that you should be sharing. So I would encourage that. Okay, here's another question. Being overrepresented as an Indian American male, I'm very worried about applications being stronger in round 2, but then dealing with less seats. What's better chances, weaker application versus lesser seats? Well, okay, so that's an interesting, actually, so when you say Indian American male, though, if you are American citizen, then I would say you really are better off, all things equal, making sure your application is as strong as possible. If you are actually Indian male, meaning that you have citizenship in India, that's a situation where perhaps it could be a little trickier because there's a lot of applications that are coming in, and sometimes schools will take the lion's share of their Indian applicant pool in earlier rounds. So, for example, Fuqua has an early action round, and I think if you were coming from, internationally, it could be to your advantage to be in that earliest group. But still, not not to the extent that if you really haven't done all these things, you're gonna, a good application is going to show up in any round. So, I wouldn't worry so much about, yeah. So if you're American citizen, then I definitely think you want to make sure you're presenting yourself in the strongest light possible. And you don't need to rush and feel like, oh, I've got to get in that first grouping. So that would be my thought there. A bit off topic, but for an essay such as Fuqua's 25 Random Things, how random is too random? That's a great question, actually. And I would say, and this is what I'd say about Fuqua. We were visiting with Dean Bolding, visited Fuqua a couple years ago, and we had this conversation about, well, what are these random things? And I remember something that Dean said that stuck with me. One thing is like one of these things is random, but collectively it paints a picture about you. So if so many of your random things, for example, are about you traveling and staying in 5-star hotels and meeting Beyonce and whatever, you're presenting a picture of yourself that is very sort of maybe self-focused, not, sort of collaborative, not, it's a way that they also look at the totality of it, of your DQ, decency quotient. And that's a big thing to Fuqua. They want good people. They want to know that you're the kind of person that's a good team player. So collectively, your random things should, should lead someone to kind of get that picture of you, as opposed to some bragging, I'm fabulous here, kind of like that person who's, puts all their Instagram pictures and they're just going from one fabulous place to the next. And they may feel really good about doing it, but it may not come across the same way to people looking at it. In terms of too much detail, like I think things that have to do with bodily fluids, too much information, perhaps hygiene habits, I always like to brush my teeth, this way or something, so there can be definitely some randomness. And I think if people are not, you know, um, try to too much make it like canned, like, oh, I like hiking, I can't wait to, go on the Al Bueller Trail or something like that. That's a little too forced. But I do think that, some things could just be, they could be random and just kind of interesting about you. And I'm trying to think of what, uh, I can't think of anything random right now to support that. But I would just say, make sure that you're not too personal. Don't throw anybody under a bus. No reason to be disparaging about anyone or anything in your random things. I can't see how that would be helpful. All right. Does the that's a very good point, Rahul. Thank you for asking that. Does the resume need to be the same or different for different schools? Also, short-term and long-term goals need to go on a resume. Okay. I would say it's going to be very difficult if you start having resumes for different schools. Like, you'll forget who you are. So you should probably have your strategy and your goals such that your resume should work for every school. There can be sometimes a little tweaking on some of the international schools where perhaps a resume format might be slightly different, but I think often the schools are if it's coming from an American applicant, may have some understanding of American resume norms and be okay. But if the school does have very specific things that you need to do, then you should, again, follow directions. That's also another really important thing in all of this. Follow directions. If the school says double space, double space. If the school says put the numbers at the top, put the numbers on top. When you're evaluating thousands of applications, it's amazing how many people you can cut just by the people who don't even follow directions. So follow directions. But in terms of resume, one of the big things you need to do, and I see this all the time, is you work in an industry, it's very technical. Like right now I'm working with a couple engineers, and it's very technical. And if you're trying to get an engineering job, you've got to put, all the details about what level of Wi-Fi and all kinds of specific details. But if you're reading for an MBA audience, your MBA reader is probably not going to understand the nuances. And if the reader has to go and check Google every 5 words because they don't know what you're saying, you are not doing yourself a good job. So you need to kind of remove the jargon and kind of think about, how can I explain this to, a class of middle school students or something about what I do. So definitely do that. You don't need to put your goals on your resume. They're going to ask you your goals in the application. So the summary statement, you really just need, your work experience, and they want to see results. They want to see that you're a person who's gotten things done, quantify things where you can. They want to see that you're a person who gives back. Sometimes people struggle, especially if you work in really demanding jobs, that you don't have room to do, you're not home at 5 o'clock, so you can't be coaching baseball, whatever. But maybe you're taking on a project with your company and you're part of a, United Way team and you're raising money. That can be a community experience that you can pull out from your work so that you can show. Schools just want to see that you're engaged somehow. If your community is really work, then let there be some things that you do in your work community that are not just part of your regular job, but things that you've kind of gone and said, I'm going to take on a little more. So I would say that they want to see, I think one of the most underutilized places to differentiate yourself on your resume can be your interests. And again, if you just say hiking, that doesn't really lead much to conversation. But if you say I hiked, 52 of the 67 national parks, or however many there are, with the goal of getting to, the rest by next summer, or favorite hike was in Yosemite, something that captures, and now if I'm a hiker, I have a conversation starter. And because those interests can be things that people are doing with small talk in interviews. So even though it may be not coming into play until later in the process, it can just give a window into, who you are. Because schools, unlike jobs where I would say that's primarily, focused on the skills, the schools are looking to bring someone to their community who lives there 24/7, who's going to, they want to know how you're going to engage with the school and with the community. So those interest sections can give some insight. Let's see. So I think I've answered that question. Deferred program reapplicant. Last time applied as a college senior, still considered a reapplicant. Round 1 versus round 2. How to stand out. Okay. So actually, I would say in your case, Gaurav, if you just applied and now you're applying again round 1 versus round 2, I would strongly recommend round 2. And I might even suggest that you consider waiting a year or 2, because when you apply deferred enrollment, that's kind of a special situation where they want people who are seniors in college. And the thought is you're not going to join for several years. Unless you started your job in, maybe you started working in January, you graduated in January, at the best, you're going to only have, at this point, you would have very little to talk about and very little for your recommenders to say. So I don't think you'd have a whole lot to say. I think you would be better to wait and actually, really focus on doing a good job and actually, having something for your recommenders to really share and getting some results. And I think that really could take more than the difference between round 1 and round 2. So I'm actually going to tell you, I think you should probably wait a while. But if you absolutely are, there's, there are a couple schools that do take some people with very limited work experience. And so if that's the case, then I would say at least do it in January, because you're going to have more time to be able to share some results, have a few more bullet points on your resume where you actually have some impact and some results. And your recommender is going to have more time to be able to have seen you. So let's see. Oh, 3 years of work experience at this point. Well, that actually doesn't quite make sense in terms of how you did deferred enrollment. But if you have 3 years of work experience at this point, then I think people with 3 years, by the time they matriculate, they'll have 4. I think you're fine. Then I would say you go in either round. How to tackle your most significant accomplishment. I can't figure out any significant from my career or personal life. Well, this is something that, and this is one of the things that's really nice about this whole process, is it really gets you thinking about things. Sometimes a big accomplishment, it might not everything saves $1 million and saves 1 million lives, right? So maybe your biggest accomplishment is, making the internship recruiting process more welcoming, and maybe you have a metric that maybe more people actually accepted you got a better yield on intern offers, or maybe you created a better culture and work balance for new people in your company. And maybe if you have some metrics around, again, retention, that might be good support for that. Or maybe you just have a qualitative example that you have, colleagues of yours that said that, because you've instituted sort of wellness Wednesdays at work or something, that people feel more relaxed and more comfortable asking and more just happier at their job. So your accomplishments could really be, they don't all have to be, I, analyzed this and found a way to save $1 million. Some of it, think about what your strengths are, where you really have excelled, whether that's, again, maybe it is in quantitative insights and data analytics, and then you should be able to have some metrics to share on that. Or maybe it's in leadership, in, culture building. So really just think about maybe an area where you're proud of, and that's a way to help amplify and show what your strengths are to the school. Let's see, how to judge our undergraduate score as an Indian, because we've got a percentage, and when we convert it to GPA, it varies a lot and it shows a point. So I would say, Rahul, do not even bother. Schools do not, I don't believe there's anywhere in there that they ask you to do any kind of conversion for the vast majority of schools. I can't think of any where you need to do that. The people who are reviewing applications at schools understand what Indian transcripts look like. They're looking for that first class. They understand that, they're comparing you against other people from your institution, not from just your institutions, but from your country of where you went to school. So I wouldn't stress too much about that. And one bonus thing for people, to think about is that the schools, when they are reporting, they are not necessarily, when they're reporting like GPA, they're not having to factor in those international GPAs into that, because they really don't factor. It's just not quite an apples to apples comparison. So if you have perhaps a more challenging transcript, it might be less important. And of course, the best way to overcome that would be to have a really high GMAT or GRE score. All right. So is it too late to apply for round 1? I have my resume, test scores, and my recommendations lined up, just essays left to draft. So I would say, no, it's not too late. Absolutely not. But these essays, especially, it depends on the school. If you're getting, Stanford's What Matters Most and Why, that's not something you should write, in 2 days. It's something that you really should sit down and think about, and, really go through several thoughtful, iterations. So I would say, get started now and see how far you get. And if you feel good about where you are, then you absolutely are ready to submit. If you feel like it's just not as compelling, it would be a shame to submit an application when you know it's not your best. So there's no reason any of you can't get an A, if you will, on your essays, because it's something you control. You can put effort into it. At the same time, you're not trying to write, a pure, some great novel that is going to win, best book or some best whatever. So you don't need to stress so much that the writing is scintillating, but it should be very clear. Like after someone reads it, someone should really know more about you, know what drives you, what motivates you, know more about your journey and some of the successes and aspirations you have. So if you can do that, and certainly if you just kind of, set a goal for yourself, maybe put a timer, I'm going to do 30 minutes a day on this, or 45 minutes on this school, and then I'm going to step away and I'm going to look at it the next day, and ask yourself some of these questions as you're reading back. Is this easy to follow? Do I have a good roadmap? Is this something that anybody could say, or is this something that I'm really tapping into what only I can uniquely say? So I think going through that process, you absolutely still have time. All right, let's see. Hold on, Ishan, what are you kidding? You have a 339 GRE. Should I be giving the GMAT? That's unless you need to be perfect, I don't know. I mean, I think a 339 GMAT GRE is pretty good, so I think you're fine. Let's see. Do two clients work for letters of recommendation, or as I come from a family business background, should I do one client and one professional mentor? Okay, let's see. So I would say one client and a professional mentor is a good choice. And I think you want to just make sure that these people are champions, these people are senior to you in some way. Even if you're not reporting to them, they're still senior to you. But I think that's a good thing. And then male business graduate from South American countries are overrepresented. I mean, I don't think so. I don't think that South American male business graduates are overrepresented per se. I think being an economist from Peru would make you very interesting to most schools. I don't think they're going to see a lot of economists from Peru, certainly not hundreds of them. So I think, and I think it looks like we're kind of nearing the top of the hour here, or the bottom, or what, the end of our hour, however we want to say it. Don't spend so much time worrying about everybody else's, like what round is going to be more competitive, or what is somebody else doing, because you only control what you do. And if you do a good job, if you think of it in a sports analogy, if you put yourself on that field and you give it all that you've got, you really do think about what's important to you. You think about your values, think about how to share, some interesting stories about yourself that really capture your essence, that you take the time to look and make sure that you haven't made silly mistakes, that you've proofread, that you've checked your grammar, that you've checked that your resume matches your LinkedIn, matches your essays. If you do all that, that's you can sort of sleep well at night and know that you've done the best that you can do. And all the time that you want to spend worrying about what other people are doing, you could just be spending it making sure you're the best you can be, because that's really all you control. And if you do a good job being the best you can be, it's going to show through in your essays, and it's going to show through, and you're going to end up in good places. So that it would be probably a good note to end on. Otherwise, we'll be here all the time. But I really appreciate the questions. It was great. Hopefully this information is helpful, and I really do wish all of you the best. And again, we've got, if you want to schedule a free consultation with us, you can do that. If you want to have look at some of our guides to help, go to some of our events. We've got upcoming events on all these things: essay writing, resume, all kinds of things. So we're happy to help, and good luck to everybody. All right, and I think I'm not quite sure how we. Let me stop sharing, and let's see.